So imagine you're looking at an X-ray of a patient.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, and it's just a total mess, like a shattered collarbone, a fractured femur, a fractured spine.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But then you check their chart, and it says they literally just won a marathon.
Wait, really?
Yeah, like they're breaking speed records and everything.
Oh, wow.
And that massive cognitive dissonance, that huge gap between a glowing top-line chart and a fundamentally broken internal structure, well, that's the exact diagnostic nightmare you face when evaluating Nicaragua's economy right now.
It really is just this profound contradiction. And honestly, it completely upends how we're traditionally taught to measure the success of a developing nation.
Right, because usually you just look at the GDP, right?
Exactly. You look at the gross domestic product, the total output, and if that line is going up and to the right, you just declare victory.
Like the country is developing, everything is great.
Yeah, the patient is running the marathon.
But you've handed us this incredibly expansive stack of data sets to go through today.
I have, yeah. It's a lot of material.
It's massive. And our mission in this deep dive is to take all these macroeconomic data sets, the social indicators, the environmental tracking data, and basically synthesize it.
Right, to help you, the listener, build a highly persuasive 15-page presentation deck.
Exactly, because you are the expert designer tasked with visualizing this data. And when we look closely at these sources, I mean, the top line numbers do look fantastic.
They really do. The GDP is tripled.
Tripled. But underneath that, and this is what your presentation needs to show, we're seeing an economy that is basically, well, systematically liquidating its natural survival to buy short-term growth.
Yeah, and we're looking at a workforce where nearly half the people are structurally trapped in this daily survival loop.
Right. So for your deck, the working title you have, which is Nicaragua's Development Paradox, Structural Vulnerability and Transition Challenges Behind Growth. I mean, it's absolutely spot on.
It is, it's the perfect framework.
Yeah.
Because when you present this, you aren't just giving your audience some dry country report,
Right. Nobody wants just a boring list of numbers.
Exactly. You're actually challenging a fundamental assumption about global economics.
Oh, I like that.
You're using this specific data to prove that quantitative accumulation, like just making the pile of money bigger, does not equal structural robustness.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because for your opening hook, slide 1, you really want to hit your audience with that counterintuitive tension right away.
Right out of the gate.
Right. You don't want to ease into it. You need to show them the illusion of success right next to the alarming reality.
So from a design perspective, how should they visualize that?
Well, imagine presenting this really stark minimalist visual. On the left side, you have this clean, upward trending GDP line.
Okay. Colored in gray, maybe.
Yeah, simple gray representing the surface level illusion. It looks great. But then right next to it, sharply juxtaposed on the right, you just drop 3 devastating metrics.
Oh, the pain points.
Exactly, with heavy, red, downward-pointing arrows.
And those 3 metrics from the sources are really the absolute core of the paradox.
What are they, exactly?
First, you have a forest area that has literally been slashed in half.
Wow, slashed in half?
Yeah. Second, a staggering 42% of the national workforce is trapped in vulnerable employment.
42%, that's almost half the country.
And third, non-communicable diseases are skyrocketing, causing 79% of all deaths.
So you just drop those numbers on slide 1 and let them hang in the air.
Right. Leave a little suspense.
Exactly. You don't explain all the complex causality yet. Because while this deep dive is focused squarely on this one Central American nation, this paradox isn't isolated.
Oh, not at all.
It's basically the ultimate mirror for almost all transitioning economies in the world right now.
It is the story of what happens when rapid economic growth wildly outpaces the institutional, human, and ecological foundations it's supposed to be built on.
Right. So for slide 2, that tension is exactly where we need to start pulling the data apart.
Because to expose the cracks in a foundation, we first have to understand the weight of the building sitting on top of it.
I love that analogy. We have to look at the macroeconomic trajectory.
Right. The surface level success.
Because the growth is real, right? We aren't dealing with manipulated top-line numbers here.
No. The sources show a genuine explosion of economic activity.
Right. And they detail this long-term GDP growth extensively.
They do.
We're looking at GDP, and this is measured in constant 2015 US dollars, so we're responsibly stripping out the illusion of inflation, right?
Exactly, making it academically rigorous.
Right. So this GDP climbs from roughly $2.9 billion in its earlier historical periods to absolute historical highs breaking past $10 billion.
which is just a massive tripling of the overall size of the economy.
It's huge. And alongside that, the gross national income, the GNI per capita, shows this very clear upward trend.
So the average person, mathematically speaking at least, is generating more economic value.
Right. But there's a catch, isn't there?
Oh, a massive one. The data reveals a really critical characteristic of this growth, and it's something you must emphasize on this second slide.
How should they design it?
Well, you want a dual-axis chart.
Mm-hmm.
Have the main axis show total GDP as this deep blue area chart.
Okay, deep blue for GDP.
And the secondary axis is the GNI per capita, represented by a thin black line.
Got it.
Because when you map this out, you start seeing these severe economic recessions.
Wait, really? Amidst all that growth?
Yeah, periods of aggressive negative growth followed by explosive, almost frantic rebounds.
See, this is where I want to push back on the standard narrative of, development.
Go for it.
When I look at a chart that triples over a few decades, I usually picture like a steady climb up a staircase.
Right, nice and linear.
Yeah, it's reliable. You build one step, you stand on it, you build next.
Makes sense.
But when you take this visual and you draw circles around those specific data points, those deep recessions and frantic rebounds, it doesn't look like a staircase at all.
No, not at all.
It looks like a roller coaster. And I mean, roller coasters don't generate their own momentum, right? They're pulled up by an external chain and then they just fall to gravity.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
Doesn't this extreme volatility suggest that this growth is fundamentally insecure?
It absolutely does. The volatility is really the first major red flag in the data.
Okay, so what's pulling the roller coaster up?
To understand that, we move to slide 3. We have to examine the engine powering that ride. And according to your macroeconomic data sets, that engine is foreign direct investment, or FDI.
Now, FDI is generally considered a good thing.
Really, yes.
It means the world trusts you enough to put their money inside your borders.
Right. And it's essential for a developing economy. Domestic savings in transitioning nations are, they're rarely high enough to fund massive infrastructure or industrialization on their own.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the data here shows net FDI inflows behaving with extreme erraticism.
How erratic are we talking?
Well, at one historical peak, this influx of foreign capital was so dramatic that it actually exceeded 9.5% of the entire nation's gross domestic product.
Wait, I need to stop you there.
Yeah.
9.5% of the entire GDP was just foreign money flowing in during a single year?
Exactly.
That doesn't just sound like a vulnerability, it sounds like an outright bubble.
It's heavily inflated, yeah.
I mean, if I'm running a business and nearly 10% of my entire annual revenue stream comes from one external investor who, has zero long-term loyalty to my company.
And can pull their funding tomorrow.
Right. I'm not sleeping at night. That is a highly exposed position.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of how that capital actually behaves on the ground.
How so?
Think of it as the difference between owning a house and renting an Airbnb.
Oh, interesting.
When foreign capital flows in at that magnitude,
Hmm.
often just looking for cheap labor or quick resource extraction, it basically rents the economy. It builds a factory, hires workers, and the GDP spikes. It looks like a boom.
But it's an illusion.
Right. Because the equity, the intellectual property, the core profits, they all leave the country.
So when global economic conditions shift, what happens?
The lease is up. Maybe a cheaper labor market opens up in another hemisphere so that capital doesn't stick around to weather the storm. They pack up the factory and the money vanishes.
And when that happens, the domestic economy is just left completely stranded.
Exactly. There's no underlying foundation to catch the workers who just lost their jobs.
So for the visual on slide 3, you really need to highlight that 9.5% peak.
Definitely. Use a bar chart, maybe with a baseline smoothing line.
Yeah, white background, gray columns, but put a massive star and a calat line right above that 9.5% spike.
Great. To show that it's not a high score, it's a glaring warning light.
It proves that the GDP growth isn't this robust organic domestic engine. It is heavily subsidized by global capital currents that the nation has absolutely zero control over.
Exactly. The growth is outsourced, which forces us to ask a much deeper question for slide 4. If foreign capital is driving these massive macro fluctuations in the GDP, what is actually happening to the human beings on the ground?
Right, where are they working?
Exactly. How is this wealth translating to the labor force?
And that brings us to this massive structural shift detailed in your sources.
The shift away from agriculture.
Yeah. Over the decades covered by this data, we see a profound transition away from the fields.
It's a really clear trend.
The value added by agriculture, forestry, and fishing has experienced a structural plateau. It used to be the dominant force, but it has settled into a range of roughly 15 to 21% of the GDP.
So the traditional agrarian backbone of the country has been fundamentally displaced.
Right. Displaced by the services sector, which has expanded massively to become the dominant economic force.
So structurally, the economy shifted from rural agriculture to urban services.
For the presentation, a 100% stacked area chart would be perfect here.
Oh, definitely.
You show the agricultural share shrinking, maybe use a textured pattern for agriculture, and the services sector, in solid light gray, just aggressively expanding and taking over the chart.
With a big arrow pointing out that structural displacement, it really drives the point home visually.
Now, on paper, if I just read an economics textbook, that sounds like textbook modernization, right?
It does. It sounds great.
A country moves from subsistence farming to a service-based economy.
Right.
When I hear services, my mind immediately goes to like IT consulting or banking.
Formal retail, hospitality.
Yeah, I picture a modernized post-industrial workforce. But the data in your stack completely shatters that assumption, doesn't it?
It shatters it entirely. And this is where you hit them with slide 5.
Oh, the vulnerable employment data.
Yes. Because the data shows that historically, between 39% and 42.6% of the entire workforce remains trapped in what the International Labor Organization explicitly defines as vulnerable employment.
42.6%.
Yeah.
That's almost half the country.
It is. And vulnerable employment means self-employed individuals, street vendors, day laborers, or unpaid family workers.
Wow.
It is the dark shadow side of urbanization.
Let me make sure I'm fully wrapping my head around this.
Sure.
So services in this specific macroeconomic context doesn't mean someone working in a call center with like health insurance and a pension.
At all.
It means a family who just couldn't survive on stagnant agricultural yields anymore.
Right.
So they packed up, moved to the capital city looking for opportunity, but the formal corporate jobs just aren't there.
They don't exist. The foreign factories either didn't hire them or they packed up and left.
So to keep from starving, they set up a makeshift stand on a street corner selling fruit or phone chargers or providing informal domestic labor.
Exactly.
They are generating economic activity, so they get tallied up in the GDP and the services sector.
Right. The line goes up.
But they exist entirely outside the legal protections of the state.
That is precisely the reality.
Yep.
It is a phantom workforce.
A phantom workforce. That's a great term.
They're structurally invisible. They have no sick leave, no workers' compensation, no minimum wage protections.
And absolutely no upward mobility.
None. If a street vendor gets sick for a week, their family literally does not eat.
That is the definition of profound structural vulnerability.
Exactly. So for slide 5, when you're illustrating this vulnerable employment, you want a visual that hits your audience right in the gut.
A simple pie chart isn't going to cut it here.
No, don't use a sterile pie chart. Use a waffle chart.
Oh, a 10 by 10 grid.
Yes, a grid of 100 squares representing the total workforce.
Okay.
Now, systematically color 42 of those squares dark gray and outline them in heavy red.
That's incredibly striking.
You need your audience to stare at the fact that more than 4 out of every 10 workers in this supposedly growing economy are operating entirely without a safety net.
That is brutal. But it gets even more complicated on slide 6, right?
Oh, yes. We have to layer another devastating demographic reality onto this phantom workforce.
The gender divide.
Right. If we look at the gender data, the vulnerability is heavily compounded.
Because usually, when an economy transitions from manual agricultural labor to urban services, macroeconomic theory predicts a massive surge in female labor force participation rate.
Correct. Because the physical barriers of heavy agricultural labor are removed, and urban environments theoretically offer more diverse employment opportunities.
But the data here reveals a really stark, persistent disparity.
It does. Despite the economy modernizing on paper, female labor force participation drastically, historically lags behind men.
It's a huge gap.
Your sources show this gap hovering anywhere from an astonishing 30% difference to, at its absolute worst, a 62% gap in participation rates between men and women.
A 62% gap. That is a chasm.
It's massive.
That means the vast majority of the female population is just locked out of formal economic contribution.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this goes far beyond just a social justice or equity issue.
Right, it's an economic issue.
It is a brutal, self-inflicted macroeconomic inefficiency.
Wow, self-inflicted.
If you leave massive portions of your female population out of the formal labor market, you are severely, artificially capping your nation's total economic potential.
You're trying to win that marathon we talked about, but you've deliberately tied one of your legs behind your back.
That's exactly it.
Because it depresses total household incomes. If only one person in the household is generating capital, the family's resilience to those macro shocks we discussed earlier is literally halved.
Exactly.
And it limits the national tax base, which means the government has less money for infrastructure.
Right.
And it fundamentally stifles domestic consumption. I mean, the gender dividend, that economic boom that happens when women enter the workforce en masse, is one of the most powerful engines for organic domestic growth in any developing economy.
And here, it remains locked in a vault.
To visualize this on slide 6, a dumbbell chart is absolutely the way to go.
Oh, a dumbbell chart is perfect for this.
Yeah, you show the men's participation rate as a dot on the right, the women's as a dot on the left, and connect them with a thick black line.
And you just clearly label that gap in the middle. It shows that even if the gap is slowly closing over time, the absolute distance remains a major vulnerability.
Exactly. So we've established a labor force that is highly informal, highly vulnerable, and deeply skewed by gender.
Right.
The obvious macroeconomic question for slide 7 becomes, how do you fix that?
How do you transition them?
Yeah, how do you transition a population from selling goods informally on a street corner to working in advanced manufacturing technology or formal corporate roles?
Well, you need a skilled workforce,
Mhm.
which brings us to the country's human capital.
Education.
Exactly. How is the education system preparing the next generation to escape this vulnerability trap?
And when I look at the educational data in your sources, I immediately see what looks like a monumental, unmitigated triumph.
It really does look great at first glance.
The data shows primary gross enrollment rates climbing incredibly over the years, eventually breaking right through the 100% ceiling.
It looks like a total victory on the surface. I mean, hitting 100% enrollment shows an immense political will.
Yeah, for sure.
It shows that government building schools, hiring teachers, pushing mandates to get children into the classroom.
But here's where it gets really interesting for your audience. Because mathematically, you can't have more than 100% of your kids in school.
Right. You literally can't.
So you have to guide your audience past this headline number and explain the caveat of a gross enrollment rate.
Which is such an important distinction.
Gross enrollment compares the total number of students enrolled in primary school, regardless of their actual age, to the total population of official primary school-aged children.
Right.
When that number breaks 100%, it means the system has just absorbed a massive influx of overage students.
Exactly. It reveals a massive historical backlog.
Ah.
You have teenagers and adults who were left behind by the system in previous decades finally entering primary classrooms to learn basic literacy and numeracy.
Which socially is a beautiful thing. It's the democratization of access.
It is. But statistically, it tells you that the system was deeply broken for a very long time, and now, suddenly, the infrastructure is completely flooded.
It's a victory of access, but it's masking a massive historical deficit.
Right.
Visually, for slide 7, a simple line chart that breaks through a horizontal 100% target line is great.
Yeah, mark that breakthrough point with a solid black dot.
And add a note explaining the overage students so the audience gets the nuance. Because that deficit leads directly to the dark side of the education statistics on slide 8.
Step 2 of the education process.
Right. Getting them in the front door of the schoolhouse is only step 1.
And step 2 is where the system collapses. High enrollment at the front door masks terrible retention inside the building.
So they drop out?
En masse. The sources reveal historically staggering absolute numbers of children falling through the cracks.
How many are we talking about?
At certain historical points, the data shows up to 230,000 primary-age children completely out of school.
200.
And when you look at the completion rates for the final grade of primary school, the numbers drop off an absolute cliff.
I think the best way to conceptualize this for your audience, especially visually, is the leaky bucket analogy.
Or a funnel chart.
Yeah, funnel chart is perfect. Imagine a massive funnel representing the nation's human capital. The government is pouring a massive amount of water students into the top.
That's your 100% gross enrollment.
Right. They're celebrating how much water is going in.
But it fundamentally doesn't matter how much water you pour into the top if the bottom is completely rusted out.
Exactly. If hundreds of thousands of kids are dropping out before they even reach the 5th grade, you aren't building human capital.
No, you're not.
You are just churning vulnerable children through a failing system.
And the macroeconomic implications of that rusted out bucket are devastating.
How does it tie back to the economy?
Let's tie back to the foreign direct investment we discussed earlier.
Okay, the FDI.
If you want to attract high-value, long-term FDI, say, a global pharmaceutical company or an advanced engineering firm, you need a workforce that can read complex manuals.
Right, they need to perform advanced mathematics, operate sophisticated software.
Exactly. If a massive percentage of your workforce doesn't even have basic primary completion, that advanced capital will never come to your country.
It creates a vicious cycle. The bad education funnel directly causes the vulnerable employment trap.
They feed into each other.
The kids drop out, usually because the opportunity cost of sitting in a classroom is just too high when their family is starving.
Right, they need to eat today.
They need to go work on the street corner to survive, which essentially guarantees they will be stuck on that street corner for the rest of their lives.
And we have to remember, human capital isn't just about reading and math.
What else is it?
At its most fundamental level, human capital is about basic physical survival.
Oh, health.
You cannot learn and you cannot work if you are battling severe physical illness.
Which brings us to slide 9, and a really fascinating shift in how the people in this transitioning economy actually live.
And more grimly, how they die.
Because urbanization changes more than just your paycheck, right? It completely rewires your biology.
It absolutely does. Now, the health data in your sources actually contain some of the most genuinely phenomenal public health victories I've ever seen.
Really? What did they achieve?
When we look at the protection of the beginning of life, the data is staggering. Infant mortality plummeted from an astonishingly high rate of over 110 deaths per 1,000 live births in the early historical data, all the way down to roughly 10.
110 down to 10. That isn't just a statistical improvement.
No, it's massive.
That is a paradigm shift in human suffering that represents tens of thousands of families who didn't have to bury a child.
And the maternal mortality rates mirrored that exact same cliff-like drop.
Wow.
It is a monumental achievement. It reflects massive, successful campaigns in basic public health delivery, clean water sanitation, childhood vaccination programs.
Getting mothers into clinical settings for childbirth.
Exactly. It shows a healthcare system doing exactly what it was designed to do in an early-stage developing nation.
Which is?
Stop infectious pathogens and deliver babies safely.
So you definitely want to celebrate that in your presentation. On slide 9, you show those sharply descending trend lines with a big downward arrow highlighting that percentage drop.
It's a huge win for the population base.
But then, on slide 10, you have to introduce the grim twist of modernization.
Right, the epidemiological flip.
Because the population is surviving infancy, because they are living longer, and because they've migrated away from rural agrarian lifestyles into the urban service sector.
The entire epidemiological profile of the nation has completely flipped.
This is one of the most critical structural challenges the country faces, isn't it?
Without a doubt. Historically, deaths from communicable diseases, infections, parasites, malaria, things that spread from person to person, dropped significantly.
Down from around 23.9% of all deaths.
Right. But they didn't just disappear. They were replaced by something much harder and much more expensive to fight.
Non-communicable diseases. NCDs.
Exactly.
We are talking about cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, chronic respiratory issues, and cancers.
And the data shows these NCDs have absolutely exploded.
By how much?
They now account for 64% to an alarming 79% of all deaths in the country.
79%. It is the brutal paradox of development.
It really is.
You successfully solve the diseases of extreme poverty, only to be immediately crushed by the diseases of lifestyle and urbanization.
Right. You move a population from active physical agricultural labor into sedentary urban environments.
You transition their diets from locally grown crops to heavily processed, calorically dense, nutrient-poor urban foods.
And you expose them to concentrated city pollution. The result is just this slow-moving tsunami of chronic illness.
Let's talk about the systemic shock this causes, because treating a localized infection or a parasite is, well, relatively straightforward.
You diagnose it, prescribe a cheap course of antibiotics, and the patient is cured.
The transaction is over.
Exactly.
But treating chronic diabetes, that requires decades of continuous, unbroken care.
It requires a refrigerated supply chain for insulin.
Specialized endocrinologists, dialysis machines, continuous monitoring.
And that is the crux of the vulnerability. A healthcare system that was historically built, funded, and trained to administer vaccines and deliver babies is now suddenly buckling under the chronic, lifelong weight of modern lifestyle diseases.
The economic burden of a 79% NCD mortality rate must be staggering.
Oh, it is. When a primary breadwinner suffers a stroke or loses a limb to diabetic neuropathy, they drop out of the workforce.
And they fall right back into the most extreme depths of vulnerable poverty.
It drains what little household savings exist, and it completely overwhelms public health budgets.
For slide 10, you really need a visual that pops. Two contrasting donut charts, past versus present.
Yes.
And on the present chart, take that massive 79% NCD slice and just pull it slightly away from the center.
An exploded pie chart.
Exactly, to really emphasize how it's breaking out and dominating the health landscape.
It really paints a vivid picture of a society transforming so fast that its own biological and institutional infrastructure simply cannot keep up.
Which transitions us perfectly to slide 11. We've seen the toll that rapid, unregulated economic shifting takes on the human body.
Now we have to look at the toll it takes on the physical Earth itself.
And this is where the paradox becomes physically visible, like literally from satellite imagery.
The environmental data in your sources provides a stark, terrifying metric regarding the nation's natural capital.
What's happening to the land?
The total forest area in the country plummeted from approximately 63,993 square kilometers down to roughly 31,075 square kilometers.
Wait, I need to process that math. 63,000 down to 31,000.
Yep.
They literally lost more than half of their entire natural forest coverage.
More than 51% wiped out.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most vital question of your entire presentation when you are addressing this paradox.
Is it real wealth?
Exactly. Is the tripling of the GDP we discussed at the very beginning actually wealth creation?
Or is it simply the rapid, unsustainable liquidation of natural assets?
Right. I mean, if a corporate CEO sells off the company's manufacturing equipment, the factory roof, and the fleet of delivery trucks to post a massive record profit for one single quarter, the stock price might spike.
The top-line number looks great.
But the company is completely bankrupt and dead the very next day.
And that is exactly what a 51% forest loss looks like on a national macroeconomic scale.
Asset liquidation is exactly what is happening. And for slide 11, merging an area chart with a map silhouette is a great way to show this.
Have the area fill drop dramatically and explicitly label that negative 51% so the audience can't ignore it.
Because we have to ask, what is replacing those forests? They aren't just disappearing into a void.
No, they're being aggressively clear-cut.
For what?
For low-yield cattle ranching, for expanding subsistence agriculture by that vulnerable rural population that hasn't migrated yet, and for unregulated timber extraction.
So it's a desperate conversion of long-term ecological wealth into short-term, low-value cash.
Exactly. And when you liquidate millions of acres of ancient forests, you don't just lose the trees.
You release centuries of stored carbon, which brings us to slide 12.
The emissions data.
Your sources layer the emissions data over this deforestation, and it is a perfect, grim correlation.
The carbon footprint data shows that CO2 emissions, even excluding land use change and forestry, climbed continuously from roughly 1.65 million metric tons to over 5.7 million metric tons.
As the economy grew and the forest disappeared, the carbon output effectively tripled.
Which proves a complete and utter failure to decouple.
Right. Explain decoupling for the audience.
In advanced, robust economies, you eventually see a phenomenon called decoupling, where the GDP continues to rise, but carbon emissions stabilize or even fall.
Because the economy transitions to green technology, high-efficiency services, and sustainable practices.
Exactly. But here, the economic growth and the ecological destruction are moving in absolute lockstep.
A step-line chart on slide 12 will show that perfectly. The emissions just keep stepping up alongside the GDP.
The economic progress is incredibly carbon-intensive.
The GDP is literally, physically being bought with trees and atmospheric carbon.
It is a massive, high-interest, short-term loan taken out against the future physical survival of the country.
And the bill is going to come due, right, in the form of climate vulnerability, soil degradation, and extreme weather events that will wipe out whatever fragile infrastructure they've managed to build.
Which brings us to slide 13,
Yeah.
the ultimate root cause of the entire paradox.
The why behind it all.
Right. Why is the forest allowed to be systematically clear-cut? Why is the education bucket still leaking? Why can't the economy move its people past vulnerable street corner employment?
To answer that, we have to look at the invisible infrastructure of a nation.
Its institutions.
This is where you tie the entire presentation together for your audience, the governance deficit.
Your sources pull from global ranking indicators, and the numbers are incredibly sobering.
What are we looking at?
In critical metrics like the rule of law and the control of corruption, the country has historically languished in the bottom 10th to 30th percentiles globally.
Bottom 10 to 30%. Wow.
When a nation is in the bottom 20% of the world for controlling corruption, it means the basic, fundamental mechanisms of state function are deeply compromised.
It means the environmental regulations that are technically on the books to protect those forests are completely ignored.
Because local officials can be bypassed or bought off.
And it means educational budgets meant to fix that leaky primary school bucket are siphoned away into private hands before they ever reach a classroom.
Exactly.
I love visualizing this through Liebig's law of the minimum. It's the concept of the shortest plank in a barrel.
Oh, that's a great concept to introduce.
Imagine a wooden barrel designed to hold water. The capacity of that barrel isn't determined by the tallest wooden staves.
Right, it's limited by the shortest plank.
Exactly, because the water will just pour out over the lowest point. You can have 100% school enrollment, you can have a tripling of your GDP, but if your control of corruption and rule of law are sitting in the 10th percentile, that is your shortest plank.
All the wealth, all the potential of the nation is just leaking out over that broken institutional foundation.
For slide 13, a horizontal bar chart showing where they rank against the global median really highlights that gap.
And we see that perfectly reflected in the final pieces of the institutional puzzle on slide 14, political stability and regulatory quality.
How do they score there?
The global scores here are extremely low, with political stability often sitting in negative territory on the index.
Negative territory, that's alarming.
A radar chart is actually perfect for slide 14.
Oh, yeah. You map out corruption, rule of law, regulatory quality, and political stability on the 4 axes.
And the resulting shaded area in the middle is just going to be this tiny squash shape, visually proving how weak that foundation is.
Now, I want to connect this explicitly back to our very first point about macroeconomic volatility.
Let's do it.
If I am an investor holding that highly volatile foreign direct investment capital we talked about, how do these specific governance metrics, the lack of rule of law, the high corruption, the political instability, dictate exactly what kind of money I bring into the country?
That is the crucial synthesis. Bad governance acts as a glass door, blocking high-quality transformative investments.
Makes sense.
If a global technology company or a manufacturer of advanced medical devices wants to build a billion-dollar facility in a developing nation, they require absolute certainty.
Right. They need to know that their complex contracts are legally enforceable in an impartial court.
They need to know the political environment won't explode in a violent coup tomorrow.
And they need to know that customs regulations are fair and won't be subject to arbitrary bribes.
And if they look at a country in the 10th percentile for rule of law, they don't even bother knocking on the door.
They just walk away.
Exactly. So what kind of capital does walk through that glass door?
Only the quick exploitative capital.
Right. You only attract investors who have a high tolerance for corruption because they're looking to extract natural resources as fast as possible.
Like the logging operations in those disappearing forests.
Or you attract investors looking for the absolute cheapest, most vulnerable labor to run low-end, low-skill assembly lines for a few years before moving on to the next cheap country.
That connects every single dot we've discussed today. The poor governance and corruption enable the deforestation.
The lack of rule of law blocks the high-quality FDI.
Because you only get exploitative, low-skill capital, the jobs remain informal and low-wage.
Because the jobs are informal, the people remain vulnerable, and the education system isn't incentivized to improve.
It is a completely closed loop of structural vulnerability.
Which brings us to the grand finale of your presentation on slide 15.
This is where you summarize the transformation and deliver the core academic payload to your audience.
The ultimate goal of this deep dive is to move the narrative away from simple quantitative accumulation. The primitive idea that just making the GDP line go up is enough.
To an absolute demand for structural robustness.
Right. Nicaragua's data conclusively proves that economic growth without structural robustness is just blowing more air into a highly fragile balloon.
Eventually, it is gonna pop.
So for your conclusion, you need to outline the 3 vital pillars of rescue derived directly from the data journey we just took.
And visualize this with 3 actual pillars holding up a structure labeled sustainable development.
Perfect. Pillar 1 is economic transformation.
Right. The nation must convert that 42% of vulnerable informal employment into protected formal jobs.
You cannot build a resilient middle class out of street vendors without a safety net. They must escape the low-end industry trap.
What's pillar 2?
Pillar 2 is ecological and human capital preservation. The country must immediately stop the ecological overdraft.
Halting the 51% forest loss is no longer just an environmental goal. It is the macroeconomic preservation of natural wealth.
Exactly. And simultaneously, they have to plug the massive educational leaks.
Because celebrating 100% gross enrollment means absolutely nothing if those children do not graduate with the complex skills required to attract modern, advanced industries.
And pillar 3, which is the foundational bedrock of it all, governance.
Right. The country must modernize its institutions, rigorously enforce the rule of law, and elevate regulatory quality.
Because without a stable, transparent institutional framework, you will never attract the high-quality, long-term foreign investment required to fund pillars 1 and 2.
So what does this all mean for you as you build this deck? It means you're giving your audience a profound reality check.
You really are.
You are showing them how layering health data over economic data over environmental data completely rewrites the standard definition of progress.
You're taking them from a simplistic, cheering view of a rising GDP line into the complex, often dark, and demanding reality of what it actually takes to safely transition a human society into the modern age. If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, I think there is a final provocative thought you should leave your audience with.
Something for them to deeply mull over as they leave the room.
Exactly.
Oh.
If a country's gross domestic product doubles, but in the process, half of its ancient forests are wiped off the map, nearly half of its workforce remains stranded in a desperate informal survival mode, its citizens are crushed by a tidal wave of chronic disease, and its foundational institutions decay into corruption.
Yeah.
Should global economists still be allowed to classify that as economic growth? Or do we desperately need an entirely new vocabulary for the development of nations in the 21st century?
Wow. That is the ultimate question, isn't it? The old diagnostic X-ray machine we use to evaluate countries is clearly broken.
It really is.
It's time to build a better one.